Hey, so where do we get to? So we went back to the dawn of time. We certainly went back to the Iron Age, and although I think there have always been bards and musicians and poets, it's in human nature. And then we looked at the kind of the sporadic different revivals that happened in the Middle Ages. There are people that believe, that there's been an underground single kind of stream of Druidry or Bardic tradition, or maybe both or either, that has gone on, in an unbroken line in between the Iron Age and today. Sadly, I don't think there is. It's a lovely romantic notion. I'd love to think that that was the case, but I don't think it was. So things really started happening big time, and in the mainstream, this isn't a cultish or underground thing, this is kind of quite mainstream, with the Welsh Eisteddfod, the Welsh Gorseth. The Gorseth is a gathering of bards. The head of the Welsh Gorseth is the Arch Druid, so we've got the Bardic tradition and the Druid tradition coming back together, but it's not pagan. It's not, what we think of with Druids today. It's got a different flavour. It's quite Masonic, and it's very establishment. This is the great and the good involved in this, and it still is, because the Queen is the chair, or the head of the Welsh Eisteddfod and the head of the Welsh Gorseth. So this tradition spread to other places. It spread to Cornwall, and Cornwall has a very well established Gorseth. They spell it differently. They spell it Gorseth. And they celebrate the Cornish language, and they award bardships to a lot of people who are Cornish linguists, and also to people that it's kind of often quite academic people, or people that have done good things for Cornwall are awarded the title of bard. And I'm not sure if it's every year or every other year, but I think it's every year. It's celebrated in a different part of Cornwall. I've been along to two of the Welsh Gorseth, Cornish Gorseth. Gorseth Kernow, it's called, Kernow being the Cornish word for Cornwall. And they are affiliated. There's also a similar organisation in Brittany. So often if you go to one of these ceremonies, you'll find that there are guests from the other ones. So somebody will come from Brittany and someone will come from Wales. So this is a particular strand of the Celtic tradition. There were two kind of strands of the Celtic languages. And my memory's a little bit hazy on this. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but there was the Brittonic, which were basically the Welsh, the Cornish, and the people from Brittany. And the version of the language that they speak is very similar. So it's slightly different to the Irish and the Scottish languages, or the Irish, Scottish, Gaelic. So I'm only giving a very quick overview on this. So I'm conscious that there's going to be people here that know loads more. If you do know loads more and you want to put it in the comments, fantastic. Be polite though. Don't just say, "Oh, you idiot, you don't know what you're talking about." Because when I don't know what I'm talking about, I tend to say I don't know what I'm talking about. So that's a kind of a very brief sketch. That's I'm probably blurring over lots of details there. So that's the most established part of the Bardic tradition, is the Welsh Gorseth and the Welsh Eisteddfod, the Gorseth Kernow, and the establishment that's in Brittany, and I can't recall the name of the establishment that's in Brittany. So all affiliated, all kind of coming from the same place. They tend to wear blue. Blue is the Bardic colour. They perform ceremonies. The Welsh Gorseth have an Arch Druid at their head. I know Gorseth Kernow have a Grand Bard. And I think they actually see themselves as affiliated to the Arch Druid of Cornwall, I think, but I could be wrong on that. So that's the kind of the more established history, but in a more underground movement has risen up, which and this is where Tim Sebastian, who I mentioned, who was the chosen chief of the secular order of Druids, he was living in Bath, and he came across some writings, not I think by Iolo Morgannwg himself, but by it's a very obscure reference. I've not been able to find out anymore. It's by a woman. I think she's called Mrs. Miller. I think she's quoted as saying, and there's some writings that specifically list 30 odd places. They're not all. Some are cities, some are towns, some are kind of quite rural locations, that she claimed were listed as ancient Bardic seats and ancient Druid seats. So quite, again, this is the sketchy part really, quite what happened in between her and Tim Sebastian, who sadly is no longer with us, to re-establish the Bardic tradition. We don't know. But one of these 30 odd places that were written as having the right to elect their own bard was Bath, and of course Tim is living in Bath, so Tim being Tim, a great reviver of old traditions. Remind me to tell you one day about the Antiquarian Picnic Society. That's another story. So he decided to revive it in Bath, and that's where he kind of liaised with Philip Shawcross. And I'm not sure whether there was an organisation at the time called COBDO, the Council of British Druid Orders, and they discussed this in their meetings, and that's why that document was kind of produced, and it was produced with the agreement. So the Bardic Chair idea had the kind of the approval of I think, you know, the consensus of all the leading Druid groups and chiefs at the time. I'm not sure whether COBDO has come back in any form. I think for last I heard of it, and this is years ago, is it kind of descended into violence, as far as I'm aware, from what Tim was telling me. So COBDO may be no more. If you know about this stuff, you know, because I am out of the loop. I'm not even in the British Isles anymore, so I'm out of the loop on this stuff. But essentially, so it had the blessing, if you like, of all the kind of the major kind of druids of the day. And Tim re-established the Bardic Chair of Bath. And the tradition, the format that he set it up in was that there would be a poetry competition each year, and the winner would be elected Bard. They would have a blue robe, and they would be given a chair, an ornate chair that was made for the occasion, for a year and a day. And their task would be to organise the competition for their successor, and therefore the whole thing would roll on. And Tim was the Druid Chair, and it did it. You know, it kind of it rolled on for, you know, and still is still going. So if you Google Bard of Bath, you'll get their website and stuff like that. Glastonbury also followed suit. And Glastonbury's got a really great, well-established, well-organised Bardic tradition, and a number of other places. If you want to know more about where the revived Bardic chairs are, Cavan Manwaring has written on that, and there's links down below. I say down below, that sounds a bit dodgy, doesn't it? It's like I'm pointing at my nether regions. I'm pointing to the description box below the screen on the YouTube channel. So, yeah. So hopefully this is kind of making sense. It's a very difficult thing to describe. It's a very messy thing, really. The other thing that's kind of made it even more messy is that other people have liked the idea of a Bardic Chair, and they've established Bardic Chairs in other places, including places that weren't on that original list, which is kind of cool, really. You know, it's, you know, why not, really? We don't even know, you know, what that original list is based on, or whether it's kosher. Most, I think, of Druid history is what I call romantic history. You know, it's not accurate, but there's, you know, but it's beautiful. You know, there's a poetry to the history. It's poetic history. So a lot of the modern Druid lore is kind of made up, but it's, I don't know, you could say it's channeled. You could say it's a kind of an expression of the spirit of the land, you know. Iolo Morganwg is an interesting character in that respect, because he gave he created a motto for the Bardic movement: the truth against the world. But you know, most people consider him a big liar, pants on fire, because, you know, he's considered to have forged these manuscripts. That's the kind of general view. New Agers would say he channeled them, maybe he was inspired, you know. So it's a kind of very strange tradition, really. And now, of course, you know, the other sort of side to this, I guess, is that 1951, the Witchcraft Act was repealed. To that point, it was illegal to practice witchcraft. So things like Wicca which is a kind of a neo-pagan religion, was more or less created by a guy called Gerald Gardner, who was a witch and the first Wiccan, if you like. Again, he was a bit of a liar, pants on fire, and he claimed lots of precedents from previous things, but mostly he made it up. He was also a druid and was involved in druid orders, and that was the point where people that were interested in, because there were still druid orders practicing around about the same time, who were broadly Christian, or that was their kind of starting point. And that was the point where pagan druidry, neo-pagan druidry, started to return. Okay, so Tim was of the pagan persuasion. However, quite often he would say to me when no one else was around that he defined himself more as a Celtic Christian, which is always quite interesting. So people will, sometimes people follow Druidry and they're very anti-Christian, and they think that Druidry is, very different. But actually Druidry, modern Druidry, owes more to Christianity than it does to paganism. The pagan flavour has only started to re-emerge. Obviously the original Druids, the Iron Age Druids, were pagan. The Dark Age bards would have been a mixture of Christian and pagan, depending on what time and what place. So none of these things are as cut and dried and as straightforward as people think they are. So we are going to have to go into another episode here. I think I've left a lot of kind of loose and raggedy ends hanging. So what we'll do, we'll have one more episode and we'll stitch them all up into a beautiful woven Celtic fabric. See you shortly.